Welcome, my friends, to Prelude to the Trade Wars. Next episode, the Vaalik. Now, the Vaalik is kind of a mysterious place. It is a place full of political intrigue and a rich history, but we'll only be covering a brief history of them. Now, as kind of an overview, they don't seem to play too much of a role when it comes to the early history of the world. They're kind of enveloped in their own problems. They aren't really... how would I word this? They aren't as much on the political stage as you would see Adrana, or you would see in Tantorum, or even like Lyria or Troia for that instance. Much like the 𝚆𝚊, they're kind of within their own realm, and that is their main focus. Though different than the 𝚆𝚊, the Vaalik have a tumultuous history that has shaped them, let's just say. So let's get into it a little bit. So as you can see in the picture there, that is the Vaalik. That are the Storm Isles, all those islands that are highlighted. And you can see all the people around them, kind of off in their own area. Now that's to the north. If you remember in the map where Trovia sits and near 𝚆𝚊𝚛𝚎, it's so high up, it seems to be like, oh, they're kind of on their own. Maybe they're not much of a threat. In the early days, yes, but as time will go on, you'll see them become a stronger power once they find their true identity. Let's go. Fact: when one looks at the flag of Vaalik, they see a circle or an eye of some sort upon a rough parchment. What is interesting is that this represents the new order taking over the land of Vaalik. By the representation of the king's parchment or letter of the realm and a new stamp of the order of Irian over it, for chaos to order, chaos of the realm to the order of the Irian. Now, how I imagine this flag is like some sort of parchment, some sort of like, this isn't a royal decree on there, but I would imagine it like the blasphemy of making a flag upon the Declaration of Independence. Something kind of fucked up like that. They're making a true statement when it comes to what this new world is going to be. Now, as for what that image is, none can really give you a definitive answer. Some say it's some sort of all-seeing eye. Some would say it's a portal. You might get different representational understandings of what this may be, but right there would be the flag of the Order of Irian, which are in control at the point of the, where the trade war starts. That would be the nation in control. But if we got to go back to see how they indeed came to power. A land desolate and fallen to ruin. The major island of 𝚃𝚛𝚎 has become swallowed by a growing curse, one that grows in the very heart of the land, and one that will consume all that inhabit the stormy land. This is kind of an overview real quick before we go into the past. The story of the Vaalik people is a complex and difficult one to tell. For at one end, the Order of Irian, or Kramos, is a slow progression of their grip on the Vaalik people. On the other hand is the very identification of what it is to be a true Vaalik person. Time will only tell if the new order's sure grip can bring in a new era of the Vaalik people, an era of dominance over the seas. And yet at its heart of the conflict, as it always is, are the folk that live their daily lives and keep the giant titans of the machine moving and oiled. The story of the real Vaalik people will be forgotten due to the giants of the crown, religion, and orders, as well as nations. For it is the people that make the nation, not the events or the figurehead that is called its ruling elite. I wanted to kind of set up here, like this is the overview of what we're going to look at. But at its kind of the cost would be the Vaalik people, the average people, and what they're going to get caught up into. I wanted to kind of keep that as a focus. Like, just remember that there are going to be these political things going on. There are going to be these new regime changes or coups staged, and what is a Vaalik person? That's all going to come to play, but at the heart of it all are these innocent people that are just kind of swept up into it. And just kind of keep that in your mind, that this is going to envelop those that which do not understand what truly is going on. Before we go any further into this brief overview, it must be understood that average folk are indeed the lifeblood that keeps the gears turning. And it is the people that are under the direct spell of the fraternity that is the ruling class. Now, in saying this, one would surely be accused of treason, but it must be stated, as the real people of 𝚤𝚤𝚘𝚎 are but humble folk that live and die by their Creator and will always serve the light of His glory. So I'm just kind of talking about it, just keep this in mind. People are being affected by all of this. This is not something that we're going to say like, oh yeah, every fucking person was like so animate about this. Like there was a fervor amongst the folk. You can see that in political groups. You can see that in even like a mob rule situation. We'll definitely get into that when it comes to time. But there is such a vast majority of these farmers or these merchants or even fishermen that can get caught up in all of this and have to pick a side. And when we're going to understand that, we need to know the geography of the Vaalik mirror. And so let's kind of talk a little bit about that. As to the division of the lands, there are 5 major islands that make up the nation of Vaalik mirror, being 𝚃𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚒𝚔, Svalgar, 𝚆𝚊𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚒𝚔, Valma, and 𝚅𝚊𝚆𝚆𝚕𝚒𝚔. They sit between the lands of 𝚆𝚆𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚒𝚔 and 𝚃𝚔𝚎𝚕𝚒𝚔 in what is known as the Irian Sea. I'm going to show pictures of exactly the one again, but the one in the beginning, we'll swoop back into that and I'll just kind of lay it out again. But there are the 5 major islands, and there are these smaller islands, which are the real Shattered Isles, that are kind of sparsely throughout this. And this is kind of where in time we're going to see a lot of land grabbing happen. What is it truly? That's going to be the biggest thing of what is it truly to be a Thracian or someone from the 𝚆𝚤𝚘𝚎 or someone that is 𝚅𝚊𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆 Jan Helin person, that's the kind of divide that'll be created. But as of the point from their beginning of history up until about the 900s, they're all Irian people. They're all people of the Irian Sea that inhabit different islands. That's as far as they would go, but it will come to a point where it matters, like, which island are you from? You're from this island. You are these people. Something that these people will find themselves kind of jammed against, even though I'm sure most of them don't really give a flying fuck. You know, they're doing the same thing. It doesn't matter if they're a 𝚃𝚛𝚎 or if they're, from Valma. I'm still a fisherman at the end of the day. They share a lot of similarities with those in the South. And when I say that, I mean the people of the Tannic South. So that would be like Sarsia and Quran and Erasium and stuff like. There's a little bit of a similarity into that kind of element of it. I'll say Confederacy, if you will. Now, the geography of Vaalik are lands that are barraged by constant storm and the high seas of the north. For many long years, the archipelago of Irian Isles were enveloped by a constant storm that blotted out Kramos. So it's this, keep that in mind, it's always a stormy place, this overcast skies. Now, they were called the Dark Lands or Storm Lands, or even Shattered Isles, because of their fractal nature. Though these desolate lands would seem uninhabitable, yet that could not be farther from the truth. Now, if we were to venture up there and we would see like these islands, I kind of imagine the archipelago of like Greece or something. There's just so many islands that are just dotted everywhere, and there are peoples inhabiting them all. But instead of the Mediterranean, we're placing it way higher to the north, so these seas are churning. There's a lot more. I mean, it's called Storm Isles for a fucking reason. I'm sure that the interesting thing about that is we're not going to see a lot of beautiful sunshine. We're not going to have a lot of pictures of this picturesque Mediterranean place. Like, this is definitely the opposite. This is definitely a place that's dark and always some sort. I mean, it's not always storming, but it's definitely more often than not. The Irian Islands hold life to a hardy people that have for many centuries, during the age of lost, we don't know what that means anymore, that word, when the continent of Vas held a young offspring of the Tannic people. The ancestors of the Vaalik sailed from island to island with ease through the stormy waters with their semi-submarine ships that have greatly influenced the great subships one sees today. The people of the Irian were always seafaring, as well as versed in the trading of goods. What that's setting up is saying, like, when mankind was rising during that age, because it's unaccounted. So when you think from year, 1 to, maybe the 900s, as mankind was doing all that shit, and the story of Tan, and then the story of 𝚿𝚛 and 𝚃𝚛𝚎, and then Adrana, and the South, all that shit was going on. They were quietly up there, just living. That's what that's trying to set up. The age in which that is called was written down, but forgotten. So I'll just, usually when I can't find an information like that, or can't deter what it means, I'll just say blank, because I'm not going to assume, because if you start putting things in there, then all of a sudden it might accidentally catch fire to something that shouldn't. On the island of 𝚃𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚒, calakin can be found in abundance, and they are made into ingots for use by smiths and even trade. Not only that, but they have one of the hardest wood found on the island of Svalbard from the 𝚿𝚛 trees that cover the islands. It has become coveted for its thick roots and strength of limb for the construction all around Atria. So already you can kind of see there are some major resources there. Calakin is like, let me see. I have it written here. A highly used metal for all purposes. It is the next step up from kramos, a metal that most forges create and most armies are outfitted with. A basic metal that resembles iron. So that's their iron, essentially. Just keep that in mind. So calakin is iron. The 𝚿𝚛 tree is kind of like, what did I say that would be like? Let me see. I have it over here. It's like a form of oak, like a strong wood, to which it's you. What is oak really known for? It's a hard, durable, workable, kind of strong construction wood. So as you can see, there's already within the resources there is a strength, and that kind of carries through with the people, and you can kind of see where their usefulness will be with these two resources alone. Let's go to the next slide. Wanted to touch upon this real quick. It's not vital, but it is definitely who they are. The power of the song. Now this is talking about the religion. The power of the voice and the sounds that can destroy wards and barriers alike. It was said that music and the voice were the most powerful magic in the Vaalik lands. The magic user could command much in the way of the voice. It would rival all others who claim the art in all of Atria. The islands of Vaalik were always cast in shadow in overcast skies. This was said to have been part of the creation or formation of the lands. For in the ancient songs it was said the stormlands were carved away by the strong gales and powerful waves on the hard ancient stone under their feet. For it was the mighty 𝚃𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚒 who gave these lands a power that they have today. Keep in mind, notice power, strength. Is something that's throughout their culture. I mean, you look at the minerals and you look at the kind of materials that are just there, and with the few things alone, with the strength of the trees and the strength of the metals in the mountains, and you find that there is a hardy land where hardy people have to live. A lot of these ancient stories would really talk about that and the strength of the people. It was 𝚃𝚎𝚕𝚒 who gave them strength. It was him who guided them into a hardship to which they must learn something. So within that, the power of the voice becomes prevalent. And in that power of the voice, we have the power of song. Now, when it comes to that idea, I'm imagining the power of voice through strength means kind of an independence, an idea of who we are as a people and what our voice can say. It has a lot of power. It has the ability to change things, much like the fist can fucking change things, or the weapon. They're trying to promote the idea. some sort of subliminal, if you will, kind of idea of the power of voice. The waves were like a constant barrage on the land, and slowly did they chip away all the weakness and uselessness, until only the strong stones stood tall and fought back. The same was to have been said for the things that crawl upon the land. They were made hardy and strong, for the gales never blew them from the rock. Their feet were planted strong and firm. This was the creation story of the Vaalik, and told of their story of the creation and how they came to have the voice of power. Quote, "It was 𝚆𝚊𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒 that gave us power of voice, to blow away all those who are weak, and to fight back against the gales and harsh, crashing waves." Again, you can kind of see what I was saying. It's just, that's a permanent thing of these people. Now, does that come across as someone whose voice feels small? Perhaps, but I mean, it's very much built into these people's strength. But not just strength of arms, strength of resiliency. And you'll definitely see that more as time progresses on, and with certain groups that will rise up, or just people in general. Resiliency is the main important ingredient when it comes to who these people are. They are resilient. They are willing to stand firm even in the hardest of times. They are willing to fight against even the darkest of enemies. These people are going to stay, and they are not going anywhere. Now, the Vaalik people did not have religion like one would see in 𝚃𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚒𝚔, for instance, but rather they would have temples devoted to the 𝚃𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚒𝚔𝚖𝚢, and the stories of his deeds and others in the pantheon of 𝚃𝚒 would be their structural philosophy and religious views. They paid homage and worshipped 𝚆𝚎𝚕𝚒𝚎, and in this they would offer sacrifices to him in their kills of war or hunting. For the Vaalik people are hungry for conflict, for it is part of their heritage. Their most common enemy was always the bandits of the northern seas, a people that are most mysterious. They would wage small wars over the long centuries, dating back to before the rise of the royal crown in the year 1223. For you see, conflict and religion are one of the same for these people, and deeds that are sung about give power to one's done on the battlefield. It's a very bardic thing. So, like I said, the voice is powerful, but so is the fist. Now, I'm not saying that they didn't idolize combat, because in some ways they did, in a sense that they see the strength within it. It's kind of a honing of skills, if you will, very similar to the fell, but within that, there's this element of religion, this sacrificial element that they have of the slain warriors. Now, when we're talking about it like this, I would imagine like this is kind of before the year 900. All this stuff we're talking about. This is the early, Irian people. They've been kind of branched into the Vaalik people and the Vaalik Mir, but that's just a catch-all term for all the islands as a collective. The idea that the voice, though, after the combat, after the fighting is done, and it said there that, they would wage small wars over long centuries dating back before the crown. Conflict and religion are one and the same, for these people and deeds are sung about and give power. So, much like you could see the idolization of the 𝚃𝚒𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒𝚔 in 𝚃𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚒𝚒𝚕𝚒𝚎, much like you could see the idolization of certain elements of kings and like Dubois, or even religiously when it comes to the descendants in 𝚃𝚎𝚕𝚒, for them, the power is given from these, like, I wouldn't even call them benefactors, but these ancient heroes. These ancient heroes become these, like, myths for which they tell the story on and on to give power back to the people. So if I'm going to say this warrior fought in this battle and he defended his people, when you retell that story in song to the men before they go into battle, it is a charging thing. It is an ability to give back and say, you are the same strength that he had within him is in with you as well. So religion and conflict and like battles just kind of go hand in hand to them. It's all of the same. It's interesting. This hardiness that was born within them has truly shaped them into being I don't even think that they're necessarily like warlike, though, is the thing. It's not like all that's going on and like, oh yeah, they're always invading, or they're always like pillaging places. That's the crazy thing, is they're not. They just honor combat. That's important to them in some way. Let me kind of show you the map again, and then I'll talk about where the islands are in brief. So there it is again. Let me get that little fucking laser pointer out. Here you go. These are the 4 islands. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4. Did I say 4? Or 5? This was considered one island, but then there was a break at some point, so there would be 5. So that's why, let's go to the next slide. Boom. 𝚃𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍, 𝚆𝚊𝚆𝚆𝚛𝚜, 𝚆𝚊𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆 which is that one. In time, those would be the major islands because of the next event. Give me it, damn it. Boom. The Island Wars. This is setting up possibly who they would become in time. It's very interesting to see this now. This was mentioned in the 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚆𝚕𝚒 video, but we'll just kind of touch upon it again. These series of conflicts would then result in the island 𝚃𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚒 that would fall under the control of 𝚅𝚊𝚆𝚆𝚆. Though the land was cursed and swarming with creatures of the darkness, as they were described, this conflict was seen by most as a futile effort to land grab and even to procure greater inventory of slave labor, to which Ethiopians did. The capture of Irian peoples would cause a rebellion from the island of 𝚃𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚒. This island would be the start of the conflicts and would unite the warring kings into uniting against the Nanaku threat, thus creating the hatred for the Nanaku people in the days of old. Many clans would rise, and this conflict's end would be a dominating power in the Irian Sea. This invasion of the Assyrians to get slaves and shit, you know, like their neighbors. The 𝚃𝚛𝚎 Islands, I talked about that. It's just this island that is no longer under the control of the Vaalik, but now directly controlled by the Ethiopians, because it is like part of the continent. This right here would create a unification. So this was a major threat. There were conflicts on the 𝚃𝚛𝚎 Islands, to which other clans were warned about, to which other clans saw as a major threat, creating, we have to strengthen ourselves. And you're starting to see a type of, let's say, island identification growing. The people that were on each island became like, okay, we need like a powerful like king, if you will. We need a powerful jarl, I don't know, whatever word makes sense to you, and he can keep us safe. And in that, when they fought against, and this was in the 400s AE, sometime around then. I forgot to write it down, but it is in the Ethiopian slide if you can find it. But this would be the event that would, where scattered displaced people were at the whim of the land and their oppressors. This is definitely going to change in the way they see things. This one moment of conflict between these ancient Anaku and then these, let's just say, Irian peoples. This is not something necessarily, it's almost like in retrospect, like, holy shit, like that's how vulnerable it can be. Apparently we have a threatening neighbor. Now, in that, the creation of the people would be, we need to either unite or grow in strength. And remember, strength in conflict is definitely something they idolize. We're going to start to see a division, though, because this king's like, well, I should be the one. Well, then this guy's like, well, then I should be the one. Like, I need to be the high king. Very much, we're going to see kind of a power struggle beginning from after the 400s AE. The early ages. Many kings would rise and claim lands and even islands. And this would have been from the year 100 to the 900s, so that bulk area. Now, the 400s was catalyst to it kind of being really progressed, but this was something that was kind of going on post 400s. Kingdoms would rise and fall, and soon there were only but a few that ruled over their own island. So in time, islands were kind of seen as this is your realm, this island. And this is the beginning of the petty clan kings and their dominance of the isles. In that time, the smaller islands that surrounded the main four were the proving ground for domination, and soon there would have been battles raging on the islands of 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒𝚔𝚖𝚢, and the Broken Heart. Let me go back and show you where those are real quick. Yes. Right in these areas. That's 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒𝚔𝚖𝚢. These smattering of islands that are close to 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒𝚅. 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒 are the ones that are, I believe, these ones right here. These are 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒𝚅 Isles, and down here is a Broken Heart. These little contesting points would be the main focus because, a king could rise up here and claim dominance over all his people. Here, 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 and here. It's where you see the division here is when that begins. But as opposed to these smaller islands where these people are kind of off to their own devices, well, that's where the proving grounds are. So these small islands were seen as, like I just said, the proving grounds. They were seen as the place to contest whose dominion is stronger than the others. These battles would amount to no more than bragging rights to the dominion of each major island, to which in time there would be but a few kings that would come to prominence as the year 1000 approached. These kings' names were lost to the annals of history for some time. Now, in time, many clans would eventually unite under monarchical rule in the early age of wisdom. This would have been in the 1000s, and for over 200 years, the petty kings would rule over their own territory until, with conflict, they would grow larger and consume more land. It's just growth. So these early kings can't seem to find their names, but they played an important part in what it is to be an island person. And my island's different from your island. I mean, it's pretty small, it's small guy stuff, but it's super important to them. And you're starting to see at this point, by the year 1000, a breaking from the idea of Irian people. I mean, they're all part of the Irian people. I'm sure they understood that. I'm sure they understood they all shared the same God. But we're talking about a division of islands now. Like, well, I'm from this one. Well, I'm from that one. And we're different. And it's all based upon these kings. Let's talk about some of the known kings about 100 years later. By 1132, there were 4 crowns of the Irian Isles, then called Vaalikland. 𝚆𝚊𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒𝚅, king of 𝚆𝚊𝚒𝚍𝚎. 𝚆𝚊𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒𝚍, king of Svalgar. 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒𝚍, king of Valma, and 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒𝚍 from Ranhalin. The last was the island of 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒, where the Republic began. For it was on the island that the people elected their own ruler, and no longer would they contest control by petty warlords, posing as kings. There was a council, and this was the first Angresi court, which was an amalgamation of the tribe leaders and the elders from each clan of 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒. They would work as one to do the good of the island. Now, we're starting to see a difference of this. These other kings, these petty kings from 𝚆𝚒𝚒𝚎, Svalgar, Valma, and Ranhalin were looked at in 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒 as a lesser kind of kingdoms. Let me pop up a picture real quick of 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒. Now, in here, this is the major Thracian Republic that would be formed in the years after 1132. Now, we'll take that off. That place is kind of seen as the hub of what the Vaalik people should become. It is a republic. These people are not being ruled by these petty kings, but instead there's a different type of king, and there's freedoms here. And this is an important transition in what the Vaalik people should be, at least according to the 𝚃𝚛𝚎𝚎. The 𝚃𝚃𝚎𝚎 would be seen as the major power of all the Vaalik people. The independent kings would keep the tradition of wars to show their dominance of their respected isles. Yet it was 𝚃𝚃𝚎𝚎 who rose above what they considered barbaric. That's just one of our words. Contests that were the Republic of Hope and Enlightenment. It's a changing of things. This is different. We can't be these marauding, lowly people. Keep fighting each other and just like staying on these islands and fighting. And it's just this bullshit. The 𝚃𝚃𝚎𝚎, I mean, in our real world, mirror kind of early Greeks, you know, or the Thracians or something. It's just a different set of people that look at civilization as something different. And I imagine you look at 𝚃𝚃𝚎, if you were to go there and you, like on the island of 𝚃𝚃𝚎, the architecture, the constructions, much more sophisticated. You're going to see more of these big, giant, beautiful castles, these huge walls. You're going to see a difference in agriculture as well. You're going to see a difference in just the whole appearance. You know, you look at these other islands, I'd imagine you would see kind of this tribalish people living in these tents, living in these thatched roof wooden buildings for the most part. And then you go to 𝚃𝚃𝚎𝚎 and you're starting to see people living in these stone buildings. It's a higher cultural thing. So let's talk about the 𝚃𝚃𝚎𝚎 a little bit more then. The 𝚃𝚃𝚎𝚎 Republic. The island of 𝚃𝚃𝚎𝚎 was seen as the bastion of the Irian people. And during the years 900 to 1100, the 𝚃𝚃𝚎𝚎 Republic would rise out of the storm that was the warring kings of old. Just like I said, around that time is when they started to kind of become their own thing. Now, it's kind of unclear as what was the contesting factor of that changed them according to their neighbors. I mean, because I would say the Etrovians would kind of send raiding parties sporadically every once in a while, but nothing in mass. Nothing like looking upon thousands of ships on your fucking coastline and you're just like, holy shit, here they are. But the threat is not necessarily there. And piracy was always going to be a problem. Not so much up here that you would see down in the south, kind of near like the Mesosar Channel or the Iepioi Sea or the Sarvine Sea. It's the waters, I should say, are a little bit more dangerous. So it's not necessarily a problem. So when people don't have to constantly fight, like the 𝚃𝚃𝚎𝚎s wanted, what do? Well, they grow. They achieve technological advancement. They discover things with art. They discover language in a newer way, like maybe writing. And you could see that in the 𝚃𝚃𝚎𝚎s. They're kind of, you know, in their mind, enlightened. Probably to the other kings, though, they're probably seen as uppity. They're like, oh, these fucking weak. Like, imagine what the Spartans and some of the other Greeks would call the Athenians. It's just like that. Think Athenian for the 𝚃𝚃𝚎𝚎. It was a sort of changing of guard. The old ways to contests of war were creating too much of a divide between the Irian islands and creating a sort of confederacy of island people. And this is something that they didn't want to get involved in. It was the 𝚃𝚃𝚎𝚎s who merely by accident became this beacon of light in a stormy sea. In the establishment of this republic, the 𝚃𝚃𝚎𝚎s would change the landscape of the people by establishing free men of the land, as they would coin them. These free men were not disallowed because of their class to participate, in theory, in the growing commerce and politics. Basically saying like, okay, like we're all free men and we can all take part in the republic, unless you're kind of like a broke dude. You know, unless you're a small, lowly farmer, then you just keep doing what you're doing. This is for the chosen upper class of the 𝚃𝚎𝚎𝚎s, this aristocratic, noble class. And out of the rising of these petty lords with their, I don't even want to say retinue, with their guys around them, their warriors, that's what would rule over the other places. Again, 𝚆𝚤𝚎𝚎, Valma, Ron-Helin, and the other one, you would see the leaders being war chiefs and war tribes, and that was the determining factor of what our consciousness will be, what our people are. Where in 𝚃𝚛𝚎, it is the enlightened class, it is the aristocrat, it is the people that are educated. And we start to see more writing coming out of 𝚃𝚎 at this time, again, during the 900s on to probably like the 1200s. You're going to see this enlightenment and these people searching for what the world is around them. In the establishment of this republic, Thracians would change. Okay, I already said that. Generally, this was allotted to the ruling class that were born into royalty. Now, the average people could participate in the habiting of their land, though this was a gift bestowed upon landholders more than the average peasant. But let's actually talk about the ruling elite in 𝚃𝚎. Let's get into who they are and their effect on the people. Vaalik family. Now, this was a great threat to the other lords who would wage their wars on 𝚃𝚎. So there was still, in time, they would still wage conflicts on 𝚃𝚎, but 𝚃𝚎 wasn't playing it the same way that they would. It was between the years of 1132 and 1223 that in the span of almost 100 years, invasion after invasion would occur during the calm season. So the seasons when the seas weren't so churning, this is when they would plan their invasion. Though this would make the 𝚃𝚎ans a hard people and great warriors of their own kind of like. Though it was the Grand Council member 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒 who would rise up and soon defeat the petty kings and bring all the Vaalik under one rule with the formation of the Vaalik Republic. Hey man, we're in 𝚃𝚎, we know what we're doing. We have to stop all these other petty lords. That's the threat. If we can stop that, then we can progress our people into an age of enlightenment. And we don't have to be these lowly, warring little creatures that are despised. Perhaps we can change that fact. Now, they were formed from a basis of the 𝚃𝚎an Republic and soon adopted to the other islands after they were conquered during the 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒 Wars, which we'll get into that. The Vaalik family would rule for the next 300 years with varying amounts of deviance from the royal line. So it's like depending, like maybe this cousin took over, maybe a son-in-law did, or, you know, it's kind of like the 𝚆𝚊. It wasn't like you have to be fucking directly from the parent. You need to have the son or the daughter. There's a little bit of variance within the family. The Vaalik kingdom dominated the Irian seas with an interconnected trade, for it was they who, over the years of growth, traded with their neighbors in 𝚆𝚊𝚛 until it was put to a halt on the 𝚆𝚊𝚛's part. Though in time they would trade with nations like 𝚘𝚊𝚆 and even Lyria. And goods would spread from all around Atria, so they're kind of getting involved in the game near the 1200s, mid to late. It was as perfect as it could be. Each nation ruled their land, and they freely traded between each other for a variety of goods. Let's talk about the conflicts that led to the, what would be called, Vaalik Republic. Let me show you a quick thing. This is a young Philippian Vaalik, and there's the years he lived, just to kind of give you an idea of what they might have looked like. Just an average-looking person. The Vaalik people from 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚆𝚒, not much different than mankind. They're, you know, like the Naka were totally different. These people aren't so much. They're a little bit the same as us. The 𝚅𝚊𝚆𝚆 Wars from 1226 to 1229. So this was during the reign of that man we just showed. As you can see, he died in the 1270s. So from this point, what was he born again? 1212? 12, I don't even know what that math is. 12 to 26. 24-ish. He's in mid-20s during this time, ruling like a young king. It's crazy. Who was born from the aristocratic class of the Vaalik family. This would be the first king of the 𝚃𝚎an Republic. Soon after the 𝚅𝚊𝚆𝚆 Wars would be the Vaalik Republic. It was seen as a consolidation of the Gáelic crown. Some would say the Gáelic family during this time had many admirers, but there were equal parts folk that saw him as a tyrannical land-grabbing king that only came to the crown due to the weakness of that was rapid throughout Thracian islands. So basically anyone on the outside would say the only reason he became king is because those people are fucking weak anyway. They'd follow anyone. Now, 𝚆𝚊𝚆𝚆𝚕𝚒𝚔 of 𝚆𝚆𝚒𝚐𝚕𝚎, king of Svalgar, 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒𝚔, king of Valma, 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚆𝚒𝚕𝚎 of Ranhalin, would form an alliance of the true Irian people. Sounds like Irian, huh? To which they would fight back against the overwhelming threat that was seen in the Gáelic crown. So this was definitely a stand. Like, this is the part of history where we don't know the whole truth. This is the part of history where it's like, why was Gáelic of the Thracian Republic such a fucking threat? Why did they have to fight so hard? What was going on that history seemed to kind of glaze over? What is happening? And like, these kings, in all theory, should all be, I wouldn't say enemies, but at least combatants of each other, decided, like, we got to unite. We have a fucking problem here. This is getting to be an issue. Why was that? That's something that I can't answer, but it's definitely something to think about. Something was going on behind the scenes that you're not going to be shown when it comes to the height of the Vaalik Republic. The wars were fought in 3 years, and slowly the massive wealth of the Thracians would choke the smaller kingdoms of the Confederacy. It was a matter of resources and a bit of luck on the behalf of the Thracians. So eventually, the wars were over. These kings would be executed. Which, the ones that didn't die in battle, so like 𝚆𝚆𝚒𝚒 of 𝚆𝚆𝚒𝚎 and 𝚃�ฑ์of Svalgar were killed in battle. No, sorry, not Svalgar, not him, not 𝚃�ฑ์. 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒 of Valma were killed in battle, but it was 𝚃�ฑ์of Svalgar and Olavi, right? Is that who was the king of Ranhalin? Those were the ones executed publicly, along with their trusted advisors and stuff. Like, a statement was being made, like, we didn't take over and say, okay, like, exile them, or like, they wanted to have a public fucking execution within their own lands, not bring them back to Thracia. They did it in those lands, and they made a statement, and they took over these places, and you are now part of the Republic. You are not a Thracian. You are still from 𝚆𝚒𝚒𝚎, or you're still from Svalgar, or whoever, but you are part of a republic. We are a united Irian people. It's the same thing that these kind of petty kings were claiming, the true the true Irian people. But this is a different side of the coin that are saying the exact same thing. So you got to imagine, again, the average people, it's kind of confusing. It's like, okay, well, these kings are kind of, doing their thing that we know about. Then we got this guy over here claiming the same shit. But then he killed our king, and he's like, but then you guys are good. We'll put new people here, but you can still do what you're doing. You're still from that island. You're an Irian folk like me. To me, that screams perhaps that there's some sinister thing going on behind the scenes. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe they're trying to unite the people, and they're doing it at like all costs. Why? What is the important event for this? What does the united people have to do with anything? Keep that in mind. Next slide, let's talk about this. A growing threat. Here's where things start to slowly kind of happen. In the years of the Thracians taking over and forming the Vaalik Republic, in the progressing years, a growing threat would become kind of snowball, if you will. There was law and justice, and, quote, deeds did not go unnoticed or unpunished, quote, so they said. It was a place that sought to bring forth the greatest aspects of the Vaalik people, and it would be they who would help the greatest nation of all, Atria, rise up and bring light of truth to the thought, for under the light of this order grew a people who were resentful in the glorification of the old ways. That's just how they portrayed themselves. But under that light was a resentful people growing. For many long years, the 𝚘𝚢 family ruled over the Storm Isles, though in the darkness was the growth of a threat that would rear its head after hundreds of years in hiding. This is kind of something that slowly grew in time. There was a lot of talk as to the ill use of power, and 𝚆𝚊𝚆𝚘𝚎 and his almost cutthroat politics. So from the 1220s to the 1270s, this is kind of something that was growing in the people. Later on, the 200 years is when this darkness would grow within the people, within these certain kind of people. So you have the republic that is under the control of 𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚘𝚎, and he is promoting a land of law and justice. Deeds did not go unnoticed or unpunished, and they were seeking to bring the Vaalik people into an age of enlightenment, to be the greatest people of all of Atria, because they're knowing that their neighbors exist in the 1200s, the mid to late 1200s. But underneath that is something growing, because there are certain people, whether they were involved in the politics of the Republic or, secondary of it, they were seeing right here the ill use of power, as it's quoted, and the cutthroat politics. They're claiming that the 𝚘𝚢 family, it's interesting. Like, why is this always in the family? Why are these people like the kings of all the other, that was about strength. You became the king when you were strong enough. This is an inheritance. And the things that they're doing to people is seen as kind of lowly. Like, he's not contesting true power for true power's sake. He's doing things in a manipulative way. So this would kind of ignite things. And the treatment of Ninonan clan in Svalgar was the main component of this. They were the most unruly people in accordance to the Republic. They were the ones that constantly needed a talking to, constantly needed to be threatened, constantly needed a military presence or even a killing or two of important people. And in this time, so remember, after the Sark Wars was the killing of their nobleman, their king, sorry, not their nobleman, their king. And that was something that they could never truly let go in the 1200s. And a clan that was sympathetic to the cause of Hjalmar Ninonan, a nobleman who would ignite one of the longest growing revolutions in all of Atria. This person, well, let's talk about who he is in a second. But there were a growing group of sympathetic noblemen that were like, yeah, you're right. This is a problem. This is not all, rosy sunshine shit. We don't even know what the fuck the sun looks like half the time. And this 𝚘𝚢 person, this fucking guy forming a republic, is taking something away that is innate in us. And so this is where the resentment grew. Again, mid-1200s and on, after the destruction. So let's go back and look at the the Sark Wars. Come on, man. 1226, 1229. So after 1229 is when that guy was killed. The 𝚘𝚤𝚎𝚘, the king from 𝚘𝚤𝚎𝚘. That's when he was killed. It is from that point, after 1229, that we're going to see it progress and get worse, and these people rising up. So from 1229 to the 1270s is a growth. But let's talk about this revolution's beginning. A cause of the hidden. Hjalmar was the cousin of Soinen, son of Teppo Ninonan. So this cousin of the son, Teppo, was the one who was killed, the king of 𝚘𝚤𝚎𝚘. Well, his son was still alive, and this is the cousin. And after his death in the year 1229, tension would rise that would divide the Irian people. Hjalmar is an important figure in the creation of what would be called the hidden. His death was laid at the feet of 𝚆𝚊𝚆𝚆𝚘𝚎 and his nation of Vaalik. Hjalmar swore that he would take revenge on the 𝚘𝚢 family, and this hatred was not his alone to bear, but soon he would amass many that were kin to the now fallen kings of the Irian Isles. He started to unite all of these family members, these hidden family members that had to go into hiding, into this coup. Though not only was he kin to the last true king, but he was part of the 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒 people. They consider themselves the first people of the Irian Isles. As to the truth in this and its origin, that can no longer be traced. They're just saying we're the original folk, man. We're the fucking original people. Whether that's true or not, it's hard to say, but that's what they would claim. Over the years, the numbers grew, but it was in the year 1245 that they would be found out. So, in the reign of this man back here, 𝚆𝚊𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆, in his reign, which I saw a mistake. It's actually, it's 𝚆𝚊𝚆𝚛𝚜. Right here, I think it accidentally made it Philippine or something. Yeah, right here. It's supposed to be 𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆. That's supposed to be a V, so that's a mistake. Now, midway through this man's reign is when they found the hidden. So, I'm just trying to lay this out because I don't know how obvious this shit is. I don't know if people are grasping this or not. In the reign of 𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆, he had a retinue of people around him. He had something called the Ansari courts. That is just the ruling elite. That is the dudes all gathering together in their togas, going down to the fucking big building. They're going to discuss what's right for the country and what's not. Slowly, they were discovering that there was a coup mounting. There was a group of these ruling men that were sympathetic to a cause. Now, growing in that, they had to discover what this cause was. And that's what's also lost history, sadly. That would have been a great story. How did they find out about these hidden? I imagine some bit of subterfuge and a bit of trickery. And when they found out there were these men that were secretly uniting, possibly against the crown of Vaalik, and to establish their own rule and claim to be original people, well, this was a major threat to the Vaalik crown. So that was not a good thing. Blah, blah, blah. Where was I? The king, okay. Over the years, the number grew, but it was in the year 1245 that they would be found out. The king 𝚅𝚊𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆 son of 𝚆𝚊𝚆𝚆 swore to crush all resistance and put an end to the old ways of warlords. Vaalik was in that time growing to be a thriving place, and soon the industry and trade would be the great hold as it was stated. So there's kind of so there's the major king of the Vaalik, but there's lesser kings that help form this republic. King 𝚅𝚊𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆, son of 𝚆𝚊𝚆𝚆, was a king, the puppet king of 𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆, under the control of Vaalik. And he was like, we'll put an end to this. We can stop this shit. Though the hidden were quieted and they would not falter, they soon would rise again, though this time in secret. So it was this King 𝚅𝚊𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆, son of 𝚆𝚊𝚆𝚆, who crushed this resistance and said, there, the hidden are done. I found some of the ringleaders and I fucking killed them. This was something that was tasked for him. So keep in mind, the puppet king did what he was meant to do in 𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆. He solved the problem. So, but let's kind of talk about the 𝚅𝚊𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆 people. Let's see if there's a legitimacy to any of this. Now, the 𝚅𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆𝚆 people were mostly coastal folk and riverine peoples, people that live near the rivers and shit. They have been inhabiting the Irian Sea for many long years, and for the most part were separate from the wars that were waged between the kings in the years before the 900s. Though in time they would find the ever-growing world of the Vaalik people closing in around them, and soon they would be integrated into the growing modern society. Whether these people were descendants of Sskepier, like the Vaalik people, I can't really answer that. It seems to be they claim that they're not, but maybe they are, and maybe this was just a different clan of people, not necessarily a different race of people, is my thinking. In the years 900 to 1200, they were considered people of their respected islands that happened to fall under the rules of the kings of each island, though they were seen as fishermen and farmers, and for the most part were left to cultivate without molestation. So they're just like, hey man, like you just do your thing and you pay us in your yearly yielding, whatever that may be, like whether it's fish or whether you're a farmer or some sort of herdsman. You could just kind of do your own thing. Just give me some of it so I can supply these to my people in my army. Soon a certain family called Ninonin would rise in a series known as the War Against the Giants. And they would rise up and kill the Svalgar king, whatever his name would have been, in the year 1037. So kind of in the past, this random Svalgar king was killed, and a king of known as Ninonin, who was a 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒 person, or whatever, a folk of 𝚅𝚊, became the king. So this would have been the first time that not a Vaalik person was king, or Vaalik, but a 𝚅𝚊𝚊 person, or 𝚅𝚊𝚊. So it's kind of a cultural thing. Again, is it clan-based? Is it race-based? I don't know. To which they became the first 𝚅𝚊𝚊. I'm going to say either 𝚅𝚊𝚊 or 𝚅𝚊𝚊. It's hard for me to know which one's right. I bet people say both. Yet when Thracia was becoming a great superpower, their fervor would grow. And when the death of Teppo occurred in 1229, in the public execution, it signaled to the 𝚅𝚊 that their way of life would soon come to an end if they did not fight back. Thus, the hidden would soon be born. So like I was saying, the people previously that were kind of like, growing and that guy thought he put an end to it. Well, they didn't put an end to it. They kind of kept going on. And the hidden is who we're talking about. Here's a quote. As to the origin of this group, well, it is not known, but what is known was approximately 30 years ago, in 1234, they rose from the ashes and took control of these Angresi courts, a process no doubt started in the average towns and cities. People who were disenfranchised and weakened by the status of the ruling class, and they knew it, though they were not taken serious until it was far too late. You can see a threat is growing in this budgeting, what is that word? Like growing republic is a group of people that are going to make this process difficult. The hidden, or also known as the Order of Aruan, so the people that you've heard about. This is their rise to power. The hidden for many years were always in the shadow of the growing republic. In fact, they worked quietly within the republic's courts during this time. So like I said, remember from the early stages of when they were discovered in the Ansari courts? Well, this is something that they didn't stop doing. They just changed their tactics a bit. Members hiding in plain sight and acting against the crown slowly and quietly. When the Angresi system had to be on its guard, for there are many enemies that hide as well. Okay, it's like a quote. It says, when in the Angresi system, one had to be on his guard, for there are many enemies that hide as well. So there were already enemies that were like, it's just like a cutthroat thing, but now you have this coup growing inside of it, and people are being like manipulated or like trying to shift sides and stuff. We have a political game being played. This would go on for years until the members would slowly walk from the minority and into the overwhelming majority in the convincing of the 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒 their plight. So this is after the 1200s, 1300s, 14. Like it's a very slow fucking process of give and take and rising and falling. It's a slow game that they played. I mean, it's hundreds of years we're talking about. How do they do this? I don't know. The Order of Aruan were said to be the force against tyranny. They were the shadow ones that hid from the crown for many long years. Once known as the hidden, they would bring to power a lowly average man's voice and now control all the islands of Vaalik. In 1617, finally, they amassed the situation and they finally stood up and caused a rebellion. 1617. The push to conquer the capital of Helsinki in Thracia occurred, And after 4 long months of rebellion and siege, finally what would be called the Order of Irian took the city, and with that they took the nation. So from the mid-1200s to finally the 1600s. What's that, like 600 fucking years of like domination by this republic? It's a big period of history that's glossed over a bit, but they never were big enough to do anything. They will always fight against it. You think of the Scots in England. You think of like the Greeks and the Persians. It's like it's a long process. You can't just do this. And they grow slowly throughout the history. And they would do this and they would do that. But the Republic would always outwin. The Republic was always stronger. And finally, the 1600s approach, close to the modern era, if in the modern era, that they finally had their chance. And they sieged the major city of 𝚃𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍 in Thracia. And they took it. Some would say they took it from an already crumbling republic after many long years of waning by the hand of darkness that was spreading through Thracia. So we'll talk about that a bit more. Though what was not mentioned previously, the land of Thracia was being consumed by a sort of darkness that was believed to have began in the small village of 𝚆𝚊𝚆𝚆 by sorcerers of the whisper. So they're like something dark is happening and it's consumed the land much like a plague. Over time, this taint would corrupt the land and curse any who walked upon it, much like what occurs in 𝚆𝚊𝚆𝚆. Remember we talked about the curse in 𝚆𝚆𝚆? This corruption bred foul creatures that the king, that King Vaalik, in his reign dispatched his warriors to fight and protect the peoples of the Älvdalr realm, which is where this happens to be. Let me show you on the map here. That is the region in which it is the threat of the fucking darkness spread. Now it was the Irian order that took full use of that advantage when they took the capital and control of power turned. They took advantage of the instability in the crown to finally destroy the old ways as the threat of the darkness loomed. It was a bold move and one that still could send the nation into ruin at any time, but what is assured is the seat of power now rests in the hands of Agrovos Jarvan and his order. Now, when the growing rebellion against the Vaalik crown was budgeting, throughout the populace quietly did the order recruit these in hushed voices. So we're kind of going back to like, how did this army form to take this place? Well, they slowly did it. Remember in those years? Well, in the last like probably 10 years before 1617, this is when it really started to kick off. Like they got enough fucking power. They can make this happen. We don't have to be so quiet about it. We're no longer hidden. We are now in order. That's the threat. And there was this war that was kind of like happening between the Vaalik Republic and the Order of the Irian. No longer are they hiding. It's an outward conflict. People were joining their cause. Islands were joining their cause. 𝚆𝚆𝚎𝚘, you know damn well did. And then Valma followed. So we now have peoples, again, average people getting caught up in all this bullshit. And so when the Republic is sending these soldiers over to fight in the the early 1600s, like 1610-ish, 1612, well, that's when they were sending these conflicts over and people were dying in droves, to set it as an example. Still ruled by the Vaalik family, interestingly, or at least they're claiming to be Vaalik. This is kind of the fucking issue, and it's just like a conflict is growing between these two powers, and these people are caught in the middle of it. And islands are supporting, like these islands, like it was, Thracia, and it would be like Ranhalin. They're like, no, we're like loyal, and so is these guys in 𝚆𝚆𝚎𝚘, the one to the south. I always forget their fucking name. But then you have these like the Valma and 𝚆𝚆𝚎𝚘 that are like fighting them. And so it's a fractal nature, and this was a civil war, though it wasn't really called the Civil War. So in the histories, like from like 1610 to like 1617, they're not like, well, that was the Great Irian Civil War. It was, but they're calling it like getting back to like what life should be. That's what it is. We have a difference in that, okay? Now, Their main ally would always be the 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒𝚔 people, and their battle cry would be justice to the old Svolgar king Teppo. And soon, oppressed supporters of the fallen king would join their cause. In the year 1614 did they grow strong enough to finally oppose the king, and no longer did they hide in the shadows. 1614 is when they started marching, and armies started being formed. Soon, all the Vaalik Islands were in full rebellion, and the loyalists to the crown were pitted against the rebels of 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒𝚔 and the king. Caught in the middle, as always, were the innocent farmers. Many fields were burned and many harbors and ports were destroyed. It was a time that would lead to famine and death throughout the Irian Sea. These, from like 1614, the official starting of the conflict, to 1617, a lot of death. Needlessly, too. These poor innocent people getting caught up in it. These people that are 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒𝚔 people that are just like these farmers, and even just the Vaalik, just average farmers and merchant seamen and like fishermen, all being thrust into the combat here. And this really helped the strength, the resolve on both sides. You're a Vaalik person, you're a Vaalik farmer, you're a Vaalik fisherman, and your fucking village gets burned down. Well, you're going to join up the military and you're going to help the Republic. Vice versa. You're a 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒𝚔 person and you're just hanging out, dude. Like on that picture there. I'm just fucking fishing, dude. You get caught up in that conflict and your family's murdered. Well, shit, fuck this Republic. I'm going to join them. And you have that being preyed upon by these high men. So let's talk about the siege of 𝚃𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚒𝚔. Helleson. There's a picture in the background of it. A rough time. Invading force comprised of all island people and some mercenaries from Albadan as well. Like they committed, man. Like all the forces of each island encircled the Thracian Republic, which was already weakened, man. Like they were beaten back to their own island. And it was seen as a coalition of destruction, as one historian would write. 4 months of the mighty siege that the Thracian king finally would surrender. And he knew his life would be forfeit, but he instead chose to save his people from unnecessary death and starvation. He's like, all right, I'm tapping out. Too many people are dying in here. But it would be a moot point because all the people of Thracia were executed and crucified outside the city walls. Like they were fucking making a statement. Innocents were going to be fucking murdered. It didn't matter. Who cares about those people? And then he was given a trial against the free people of Irian. So after the city was captured, after this long 4-month siege, he was brought out with his family and he was put on trial in front of this, what we would call a kangaroo court, and which would lead to this next slide. And that would be the public death of Urias Kārlik, and that was the last Kārlik king. This would mark the moment of the changing of guard. Outside the conquered city of Hellenon was the Thracian king put to the torch, as well as his family and retinue around him. Like they fucking killed all of them. The Aruan court, some would call, rushed and without proper law would sentence, after a long list of supposed illegal actions that were taken by the crown, and most of all the sentencing of the death of the 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒𝚔 kings, even though this would have occurred some 500 years ago. They're like, you're also going to be to blame for that. Your family. His death is finally being justified. This first 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒𝚔 king. And it was seen more as a ceremonial sacrifice that was fueled by pure vengeance. Soon the king would be dead, and any who still supported his regime. Like, this is definitely like, you better pick your fucking side right or you're dead. In time, the island of Thrace would fall to the order, and soon the Aruan order would take control of the Vaalik Republic. The name would stay the same, but internally everything would change. By 1620, Vaalikmir would be under a new rule fully, and they would set their eyes on external trade in greater abundance. They didn't consider themselves the Vaalikmir Republic. They were the Vaalikmir, the Vaalikmir people, ruled by the Aruan. So the Aruan Vaalikmir. And it was that one dude. I don't remember his name, so I got to go back. I forgot his name. Yeah, and 𝚆𝚆𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞, that would be the new king. So 𝚆𝚆𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞 and his Vaalik people. So that is the modern king of the Vaalik. But I want to talk a little bit about the actual curse of Elpo, as it was called. That thing that they said kind of weakened them in Thracia already. Now, they had no better luck in the quelling of the curse, and soon, like this is, okay, so this is after the fact. When the Aruan people stepped in, they didn't have any better luck trying to quell this. Remember, that was a constant threat there. And soon people would flee, many people would flee the island in fear. The only good news was the threat stopped in its growth, or at least it appeared, in the year 1619. For over a year, they saw no spread, and beyond the borders that were surrounded by pits of tar and fire to stop the beasts from entering the free lands. They're like, well, it's a couple years after, it's not growing. We got it contained. That's just going to have to be good enough. And 𝚆𝚆 himself created a legion of men called the 𝚃𝚛𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒. That's what it's called. Devoted to guarding the darkness, that are much similar to the Chevalier 𝚆𝚊𝚆𝚕𝚒 in 𝚆𝚆. They will protect the surrounding lands from darkness and bring order to the providence. Now, as to the origin of the darkness, some believe it would be conjured by wicked sorcerers looking to awaken what was believed to have been the dead titan 𝚿's corpse, which serves as the mountain. I didn't put. Obviously unsuccessful, but these sorcerers were put to death when they were apprehended. They think that maybe there was something going on, that these like fucking whisper like little cult were trying to awaken a titan. But they're like, well, you can't. But now you made a curse happen. Well, we don't know why that was going on, but it was something that was happening. Nothing notable of late can be said about the curse further than the legion of 𝚃𝚘𝚊𝚆𝚒. I think 𝚃𝚘𝚊𝚆𝚒 is what I used to call it. It's now called 𝚃𝚘𝚎𝚊𝚆𝚒. They stand ready in the borders to stop any creature from venturing out. So they kind of tried their hand at fixing the problem. They couldn't. So they created an army to guard it. That's essentially what I'm saying. From 1619 on. Now let's talk about the order. Now, speaking of 𝚆𝚆, it would seem the relations between the Aruan order and 𝚆𝚆 hot society had grown closer within the years of their reign, so after 1619. And together they strengthened each other for the coming tide. For it was the trade wars, and this I'm going to go into a little bit of the trade war, that this momentum finally came to a head as they were formed an alliance of trade while the southern countries fought. The Order, as we call them, made a new trade agreement with Adrana as well. So they were kind of doing the thing Adrana was doing, like, well, while these guys are fighting in the 1625 to 1630, let's kind of work on some things outside of that. We're not going to do that. We can supply people with stuff, and they did, and you'll see that they did. But they're not necessarily directly involved, but maybe some of their things that they created were. So basically, they were just trying to put away the odds of it that they were having against Trovia. They were trying to establish a new people, so you'd see a weird alliance between old enemies. It's like 1,000 years later, after the Celts invaded the Romans. Imagine 1,000 years later, they're like, we're cool with you. Like, something fishy is kind of happening there. And then after the trade wars, an alliance was formed between Etrovia, Vaalik, and 𝚆𝚆. And then like later Lyria. So you kind of see a growing of power after the trade wars. I'm not going to go into it too much, but just know that they're picking a side. Trade war, they weren't. Trade war, they were like taking advantage of the conflicts. They were just like, well, while they're fighting, let's supply the Lyrians and the people of 𝚆𝚆 with the ships that we know how to build. Let's give them minerals. Oh, wait, they can trade with us. Oh, Adrana's over there hanging out. Let's just hang out with them. Let's see what they have, and we can work together. They're just doing that back behind the scenes shit. Now, so they would trade, blah, blah, blah. This would be a choke point for the vessels of the Trovian Lyrian Pass, it was called. The Vaalik merchants had to trouble sailing. Okay, the Vaalik merchants had no trouble sailing north and around Ετρόβια that way. Most sailors would be fearful in such churning waters. But as for the Vaalik seamen, they were hard-tested men at sea, and the prowess was renowned worldwide. Basically, I'm saying there that the people of the Vaalik Mere were... You don't see a lot of ships coming into the Irian Sea because of how dangerous it is, where the Vaalik people were totally fine with it. That's why there wasn't a lot of invasions. You know, especially like when the Ετρόβians realized that, like, okay, like, we can't fucking do this. They took advantage of that well and good. And so the Vaalik people formed an alliance, and they never really felt threatened by anyone because of where they sit. It's impossible. Try. Your ship will sink. You don't know how to navigate these waters like we do. Now, like I said, the order kept the name Vaalik Mere and the Vaalik people. And the mixing would become more noticeable between Vaalik and 𝚅𝚊𝚊𝚕𝚒 people. And it would be a united Vaalik. Like, they're just uniting these people. It's not necessarily a racially tense thing. So, again, that's why I'm leading to believe that it was a clan thing, not a race thing. So, in some sense, this was a blow to the control of trade, but it did give the order the legitimacy of the Atrian stage and cement their right to rule. Like people not being able to trade within them. But though they would not seek to honor the old ways of interconnected peace, instead they would look to the horizon of domination of the waters of Atria. So they're like, dude, these are our waters. We can navigate these ones. We can have them all. Now, within the order, they did not want to sign a treaty. Which treaty? Did I mention it before previously? In the year 632, New Trade Alliance Act was signed between Dubois, Vaalik, and Ετρόβia. Yep. They've been trading for centuries. Though they had been trading, this would ensure the seas would still in fact belong to no one, yet they were clear lines divided up as to who would secure their own proportion of the sea. Now, that's what they were saying. Like, I missed that, so that's my bad. The choke point for the Ετρόβian Lyrians in there, they said, okay, that's ours, and you can't sail beyond it. So the Irian Channel and the Vaalik Mere were like, well, we can just go north and around. We have no problem there. So they signed an agreement to say, okay, we're not going to like sail through your lands militaristically. And they're thinking like, fuck that. We have to kind of change the way we do this. And though it kind of, they wanted domination of the waters. So that's what I'm trying to say. They didn't want this peace treaty because the waters, let me show a map real quick. This area here, they did not want to, like, they weren't allowed to sail their military through. So they would go up and around Ετρόβia instead. And that was a treaty that they signed. If they were going to trade and be in alliance with Ετρόβia and Lyria, well, they're not going to be able to use this area militaristically. And they knew it was like a rough end of the bargain, so they kind of had to just do it anyway. That's what I meant when it says, like, okay, though it helped their trade, but they didn't really, it kind of fucked things up a little bit for them. Now, within the order, they did not want to sign this treaty, but it was understood that the Royal Navy of Ετρόβia was no longer preoccupied by trade war, and they once again ruled the seas with ease, at least east of the channel. That would be one of the greatest threats to the order going forward. This amplified the relations between them and the hot society in 1632, so going forward. And they formed a different alliance. I'm not going to go into that. We'll get into that later, okay? Just because it'll ruin some of the next videos. They would not pose a direct threat, but they would be a passive one. So that's kind of like the Ethiopians said, well, you can't go through here, but neither can we. They're like, well, this works out. This definitely works out for us. The Irian Sea is the most dangerous of all the Iliprians. This is why they're not concerned with them coming into them, the Irian Sea. It has been called the vortex because of its rough and coarse seas. Few ships can traverse the waters, making travel north almost impossible. And through the narrow waterways of the Irian Islands, it is seen as a death trap for sailors. They know what they have. They know that they're a defensive powerhouse and no one can destroy them. Many ships are destroyed. So it was a natural barrier to the order and their ships of war. Let me go into the last slide, which is the military slide, and then we're all done with the video. Throughout the years, as it was stated, the warriors of the Vaalik culture were a fierce people who carry the reputation of being bloodthirsty. Now, the truth is, they fight in honor of their Aeon and pay homage to him with their victories, like I said before, in the religious part. It is why I believe that the victory on battlefield can and will bring honor to the family name, and defeat would in turn bring disgrace. So it is the warrior code to never surrender on the battlefield. It is better to go out fighting than to be cast into chains, something that was formed in the 400s because of the Trovians. Now this belief carried from the Neolithic times to the modern era, except the reality of the crown complicated this, for it was seen as the dying in service of the crown, and was in fact the dying for Sskeipur. This is what the people would claim, that they had to crush the 𝚃𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚒 Republic. This is killing our god. It's destroying our ways of fighting. The Aruan order is going to restore this. It was something that they had as people, but was being destroyed. Now the Aruan order knew, like, okay, like, we're going to bring this back. We're going to keep our god alive. Whether, through worship keeps an Aeon alive. Well, how can you worship your god if you're a people of war and you're not fighting? That's their justification. As it was said to the soldiers, it is the crown that is a conduit for his bidding. Your king is the chosen son that you must die for. Now, this could just be propaganda, but nevertheless, it has been adapted in the years of conflict. To die for king and Aeon. So, again, that is the battle cry of the order. No longer are we dying for this twisted man. Now we're dying for king and Aeon. We're going back to the militaristic ways. We're going to start seeing, to put it in retrospect, or whatever the fuck that word is, instead of being this republic of enlightenment, we're going to go back to being these war people, because that is how we honor our God and our king. And through that, we give him power. And if we give him power, he gives us power. We have to get back to that point. That's what this slide is trying to present. Going back to war is how we fight, because that is how we gain our strength. In the modern era, after taking the throne by the order, this has lessened. After many generals were blackballed and killed, who swore their allegiance to the crown. Many men died in the night of bloody daggers, where the coup of the order truly began. So this is when they killed the generals and all that of Thracia. Still to this day, there's a division between king's true men and the men of order. A civil war that was waged in the shadows. That's basically what I'm saying. The king's true men and the men of the order, that's the division that was happening back in the 1200s and stuff. I had this slide a little out of order. I didn't know where to put it, but I wanted to have it at the end so I could say they want to go back to that point. Their military is weak in their eyes. They're nothing, and they need to build back up again. And what better way to do it than to have this new order and to worship their king and to worship their Aeon. And that's where they are going to walk into it. So when we walk into these guys, it is right after the curse of 𝚆𝚆. And they're building again into the trade wars. But that's that. That is the Vaalik people. And there we are, my friends. Now, I don't know. This one I did quick, man. I thought I was going to have more days, but I ended up getting a lot of this shit done pretty easily. So, in retrospect, the Vaalik people are a warlike people that lost their ways for a while, but are going to be regaining it once again because of a new regime change that is the Order of Aruan. Under Javanos, or not Javanos, whatever the fuck his name was. And they are rising from the shadows, and they are going to take the seas of all of Atria, and they shall be theirs. So there you go. Next one. What do we got left besides, I think Albadan's only one left, and Willandia. As I stated before, I'm debating on if I should even do, what the fuck are they called? Albadan. Debating because they're not involved. At all. in anything. So I don't know if I should do that. I might do that later as their own video. I think I'll just do that. Next will be the last non-mankind nation, non-Anaku, and that'll be Willandia. After that, I'm going to start the video about the story of mankind and getting into that up to the trade war, and that'll be the goal. So look for Willandia next, and they're interesting people as well. They very much resemble the Phoenicians. So more like Carthage and Phoenicians and stuff. Very similar story. So kind of keep an eye out for that one. That'll be next time. Motherfucker. Welcome to the next edition, or whatever, prelude to the trade wars. The Vaalik. Now, this one's done a little early because this one seemed to be pretty easy. It usually is in the Vaalik. This time we're going to be going into the Vaalik people. This is an area that's full of mystery, political intrigue, and a very rich history, but we will only be covering just a brief history of it all. In fact, I think it's less than 30 slides, so it's about average. So, a little overview of them. Though it may not seem like it, the Vaalik don't really seem to pay. They don't seem to really. Let's do another take.